just ran out here after finishing our golden hour pool shot, and I knew that we weren't gonna have much time between the light being perfect for that pool shot and the light being perfect for this shot. So we scouted everything ahead of time. Maybe 6 or 8 hours ago today, Adam and I came out, we found the perfect shot, we put the furniture where we thought it would be best, and here we are. So one thing to keep in mind is that the restaurant is open. When you're shooting a hotel, oftentimes you're not gonna have the luxury of closing a restaurant or an amenity to get the perfect shot. We are gonna have people milling about, but I'm not too worried about that. I think it is going to add to the effect of it being a lively restaurant on the ocean front in a beautiful setting. One other thing to keep in mind is that you're gonna have to talk to your client about this. I know that all the faces here are gonna be blurred, and for obvious reasons, most hotels don't want crystal clear photos of their guests on their website. So if you're gonna use people in the shot, make sure that they are adequately blurred so that no one recognizable is in the final shot. Because there are paying customers here, it's gonna limit how much lighting I can do. For that reason, I'm gonna use hot light, which is much less annoying than strobe. I don't wanna run around, no pun intended, flashing these people while they try to eat dinner. So like I said, I'm gonna use a hot light. It's gonna be much more gentle on the eyes, and I think it's gonna work with the effect we're going for here. We do have a nice wooden restaurant. I do think the hot light adds nice warmth to wood. And lastly, one thing I just thought about is because there's so much wind out here, if I was gonna use strobe to light these trees and this grass, it would be a nightmare to composite. When I use hot light, that light is going to be on for the full length of the exposure, and any blur in the trees is also going to be lit by the hot light, which is going to make lighting this much easier using a hot light. So for all those reasons, tonight we're sticking to hot light. We're going to leave the strobe in the bag. All right, so we did try to stage this a little bit earlier. We actually moved all these tables to where they are right now. It looked way different, way messier earlier today. Now again, this is an operating restaurant, so if they need to bring out more tables, there's nothing we can do, but we started off with the best picture that we could. And if it changes throughout the night, since we have so many pictures, maybe we'll be able to composite something together and rescue it, but I don't think it's gonna be too big of a problem. So as I'm doing this interview with you guys right now, I'm talking, I'm trying to keep an eye on the sun. It's a little bit crazy out here. Even though I've got all that going on, I'm still bracketing shots using the Cam Ranger to capture that wide range of brightness and colors as the sun sets. So the shot I have in my head is more of a blue hour twilight shot. We've got these really cool candles lighting the interior, and we have some color left in the exterior, some amazing clouds. I think it's a little bit too early. As you can probably see, the light is a bit too flat right now. I want the colors to get a little darker, a little more saturated, and that is going to happen as the sun goes further and further below the horizon. So for this shot, I'm using my 24mm tilt shift. There's not too many complicated things going on. I've got the lens almost straight ahead with no sideways shift, but I have shifted up. As I have said many times, I love these iconic Hawaiian palm trees, and I absolutely love the setting. I think it adds a great effect. So it's a relatively simple composition, and I'm shooting relatively wide. I want to keep this restaurant, again, in the context of the environment, show the setting, show the beach, show the ocean, show the mountains, show the palm trees, show the restaurant. I'm not shooting the restaurant straight on because obviously I've got to capture this view, and I don't think it's that important. I just want enough of the restaurant to show exactly where it is because that is what sells this restaurant. It's not the interior, not a picture of the whole thing, but a picture of it in this amazing Hawaiian setting. All right, so something to note, I wanted to try it out. I put a polarizer on because I felt like this foreground, the water was a little bit brown, a little bit dull, and I know that a polarizer can cut some reflections or add a lot of color to a scene, and it worked beautifully. Between these two shots, you can see the sky starts to pop a little bit more. That water looks nice and blue because it picks up the reflection of the clouds, and I'm liking this a lot more. Again, just as a simple polarizer, rotated to add as much effect as possible. So right now is that magic time when the exposure of the sky matches the exposure of the interior. Those interior restaurant lights, I think they're just candles, are bright enough to be the same brightness as the sky. Again, the sky has gotten darker, and relative to that, the interior has gotten much brighter. This is when those beautiful twilight architectural photographs are made. I'm gonna go a little bit further here, and I'm gonna add, like I said, a little bit of hot light, just to add some detail in the foreground. I want a little bit of light on that bridge. I don't wanna get all up in the restaurant patrons' faces, but I do want to see if adding a little bit of light will help to bring some definition and color to that landscape. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to take my Lowell GL1 instead of a flash. I'm going to go with a Lowell GL1, it's a much warmer light. I'm going to paint that over a long exposure to create nice soft highlights on the foreground. Right now I'm at 6-second exposure, f8 ISO 200, so I'm going to have 6 seconds to paint that hot light over the foreground. I don't know if it's going to work. We're going to give it a try and see how it looks. If I like it, we'll keep going. If it looks, we'll quit. But now's the time to do that. As the light gets darker and darker, that hot light, again, relative to the sky, is going to get more and more powerful. So as you just saw, I used my hot light to paint some light on the scene. I wanted to bring out some texture and depth in the rocks in the foreground, some of the rocks in the background, and generally the whole foreground scene I thought needed a little bit of lift. It was a little bit flat, and just like I painted my lights inside, I'm going to use the hot light to do the same exact thing. I'm going to come at the camera, Again, just to give a little bit of texture, a little bit of contrast, a little bit of depth to those foreground elements. It's a really simple process. I open the shutter, walk around, paint my light in, and then I'll put it together in Photoshop. I didn't light paint the building itself because if I'm standing over here and lighting the roof, I know that I'm gonna get people looking at me weird because the light is kind of glinting in their eyes. I'm sweeping a hot light back and forth over the building. Not gonna be a good thing for the people eating dinner. If I did it from right up underneath there, again, I would be really close. People are gonna be wondering, what is this guy doing? I don't want to disturb these people who are eating dinner. That place costs a fortune to eat at. And again, if anything goes wrong, I don't want these clients of the hotel going on TripAdvisor or Yelp and saying there was a photographer with his light in my face the whole time during my $100 dinner. So I am going to kind of tiptoe around the restaurant and only light the foreground. I think that's really all we need anyway because their composition is so strong and the color is so beautiful that just a little bit of hot lighting is all it's going to take to make this photo really pop. Another reason I don't think I need to light paint the roof is because I have so many exposures from earlier where there's enough directional light on the structure to see exactly what it is. I don't think any part of this photograph is going to be completely black. So as you can see, I've been out here for about an hour, capturing the wide range of brightness and colors that occur over the entire length of a sunset. I then added my own light, and we have a ton of pieces from which we can put our final photograph together. So all that being said, let's take these all into Photoshop and see what we can get. So that was a long night. That was our restaurant shot, and we actually got kind of lucky with this one, and there's gonna be 2 finished images that we're gonna pull out of that little session there. So first, of course, we have to get our twilight shot, which is the one with all the light painting and the amazing sky and the blurry water and the people walking around inside. I think that's gonna be a great shot, but we also, like I said, we did get lucky, and there's another shot that I wanna talk about, and there was an amazing golden hour shot. I put the camera down just in time, and I wasn't really planning on getting this, but we do have the files, and I'm gonna take an extra 5 minutes and edit this and deliver it so that we have a very happy client, and I'll show you 2 different techniques on each of those shots. So without further ado, let's go ahead and start editing our first twilight shot. Now I've already, again, culled these so that, and what we have is our nice twilight base exposure with our dark sky and our detail in the foreground. And as usual, I am going to pull up the shadows on this to get a little more detail out of there. I'm going to leave the highlights alone. I might bump the exposure a tad just to get detail everywhere so nothing is totally in shadow or totally blown out. And maybe I'll pull the highlights down a smidge for that left-hand side, but I don't want to go too far because I do like that nice bright interior. So something like that. And then we can take our light painted frames, and you can see if I zoom in here, there I am with my GL1 kind of painting the light everywhere. I'm going to bump the exposure on those, maybe like by half a stop or so. And I'm not going to pull the highlights down because I don't want to pull out any of that, the brightness caused by the light. But I might bump the shadows a bit so that it does blend a bit seamlessly. And I'm going to take that and all of our light painted frames here, and you can see me kind of going along the water's edge. And I'm going to apply those adjustments to those light painted frames. Now, I did do a whole bunch of light painting in the foreground, but as I was kind of culling and going through and looking at this, I decided to drop that because there's not so attractive, the rocks in the foreground. It looked a lot better in real life than it was in the photo. So I'm just going to let that sort of fall into shadow and leave my light painting around the restaurant, the structure, the activity, so that the eye stays focused over there. And you'll see what I mean once I get into Photoshop. So let's go ahead and take these files, sync them up, and start our work in Photoshop. All right, so here in Photoshop, I'm going to go to File, Scripts, load files into Stack, browse to this lessons folder, and we'll open up all 6 of those files. Go ahead and click OK. Okay guys, so here we are in Photoshop, and on top you'll see all my light painting frames. This is luckily a relatively simple shot, but it is worth investigating a little bit of how or what it takes to get these files to blend nicely together. So I'm going to start at the front here with our base exposure, and now what I want obviously is for these light painted pops of light to show up. And if I just go and try to add a black layer mask and try to paint these in, what happens is we're going to get some of that darker night along with our light painted exposure. So we're darkening a lot of the scene when we don't have to be. If I change the blend mode to lighten, what happens is you get some of this like funky coloration in here, and you still get a lot of mess in the rocks. So what we're going to do to solve that problem is we're going to turn that layer off. There's that weird color again. I'm going to set the blend mode to normal, turn that off. And in order to get these all to blend a bit better together, I'm going to just darken my base exposure selectively in some areas, not all, but especially where I know I'm going to do some light painting. So I'm going to grab a new curves layer, and above that base exposure, I'm just going to darken some of the scene. Now I can go ahead and invert that layer, and now taking a white brush, I can then darken the areas I know I'm going to add light to. And that will ensure that when I do add those frames, all I'm getting is the nice clean light from my hot light. And again, these rocks aren't the prettiest things in the world, so we'll let them sort of fall into shadow. And that might be a little bright over there. I don't want to go black with it. I do want there to be some detail, but I don't want it to be so bright that it distracts from the main scene over here. And there you can see the work that we've done. Pretty subtle, but it's going to make everything blend together much better. So now you know how this works. I'm just going to take my light painted frames. I'm going to set the blend mode to lighten. I'm going to Alt-click to add a black layer mask. And with a soft brush, start painting in some light on those rocks to give some separation, a little bit of separation between the water and the rocks in a restaurant, add a little bit of depth and dimension to the shot. Same thing here. And set the blend mode to lighten. All right, so I'll group those all together, rename it light painting. Gonna add a mask, do a little bit of cleanup. So that things are looking pretty good. All right, and you'll see here on layer 2, if I disable that mask, you can see why the hot light is a really good choice when you're painting with long exposures, because these branches and the palm trees, they got really, really blurry. And if I were using a strobe, it would have just frozen those trees right in their path. But because I'm using hot light, I'm much better able to light paint and retain that detail, even though the trees are blowing around like crazy. Okay. I also kind of want to add a little brightness inside, so again on the second layer here, we're just going to paint some more of that in, add some brightness over there, get some motion, some light trails, make this place feel really alive. Okay. All right, so that's a pretty simple amount of light painting. I do want to make this a bit more interesting, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to go to a hue and saturation layer, and I want to make this feel a little more tropical, a little more fun. So I'm going to bring this sky, it's like a pretty plain blue, honestly. I'm going to bring it down. I'm going to select the blues with my little hand tool here. And I'm going to take it, we'll go a little purple with it. Desaturate it just a bit. We'll go to something like that. Okay, and now, let's see, if I zoom in, I like my blurred people down here. I like all this activity in the restaurant. Really sort of gives this place a bit of life. And honestly, it was pretty simple to get that to come out. So what we're going to do is I'm going to go in and do a little bit of cloning, a little bit of cleanup. I want to just get rid of this little patch of dead grass down here. So down on my base layer, I'm just going to copy and borrow some of this grass. Control C, Control V. I'll drag it over, give it a little stretch, make the sizing right, add a mask, get my brush out, and we'll paint away some of that excess. Something like that, and we can duplicate it, cover up, maybe flip it horizontally so it doesn't look so clony, give it a little rotate, something like that. And again, just brush in a little bit of that grass to hide that dead foreground. If we have to, we can add a curves layer, darken it, make it blend in a bit better. To something like that. Okay, now there's a little cloning I could do just to clean this up. Like I said, if you want to go nuts with the frequency separation, go for it, but I don't think this image really needs it. This is mostly a right time, right place kind of picture. Okay, all right, so it's time to put the finishing touches on here. I'm just going to sort of clean this up, call that our base group, and our light painting group right there. There's some coloring. So after my cloning there, things are looking pretty good. I might want to go a little more intense with the color. I'm going to add a solid color adjustment layer, grab like a darkish purple, something like that. Put the opacity down at 10, 8, 7%, and you can put the blend mode at overlay, or you can do color. That's looking pretty good, so that everything blends together. That purple sky actually feels like it's part of the landscape. And I'm just going to brush some of that out of this interior so that we keep that nice warm glow in there. All right, and I think that's pretty much our finished shot. That was a simple one. We're going to go Command-Alt-Shift-E to flatten all to a new layer. Drag out our rulers. Make sure everything is nice and vertical, which it looks like it is. And we can go ahead and hide those and save this shot. And that's pretty much going to be it for this one. Now, the next thing I want to do here is show you another sort of sky replacement technique that we haven't yet touched on in this tutorial. For the earlier shot that we did get lucky with, we have a beautiful last rays of sunlight hitting this before twilight, and I'm going to try to deliver something out of those as well. Okay, so we're going to jump back to Lightroom real quick, and I'm just going to show you right when we got out to that restaurant, what you can see is the last rays of sun. And now I admit that we totally got lucky here, but I love the way that these shots look with that golden hour. If you see my portfolio before, you know I love those soft, low contrast scenes with directional light kind of spilling over everything. And while everything was in place, I wasn't really planning on making this happen, but the light was perfect. We just caught it at the perfect right time. So I'm gonna do a really quick photo here. Gonna deliver an extra shot to the client, hopefully make them a little bit happy, more than they paid for. So here is, like I said, that same restaurant scene before, but a bit of a different mood. So what we're gonna do is similar to the last shot that we did. It's gonna be in the same vein as that. It's gonna be a golden hour type of sunset shot. And we already have all of our activity, our people, so we don't need to do too much compositing there. So what we're gonna do is just in Lightroom, I'm gonna bring up the shadows, bring down the highlights. I think this is a little overexposed, honestly. So I'll bring the exposure down a nudge, like a third of a stop or something. That feels better. I do want it to be bright, but not, you know, overwhelmingly so. Somewhere in there looks pretty good. And let's see. Looks like I've got this confused looking guy over here. We'll have to get rid of him, but that's no problem. And this is really just going to be like a single exposure opened up in Photoshop with the sky dropped on top of it. Super easy way to get some amazing, amazing sky replacements. So let's go ahead and open this guy in Photoshop. All right, so in Photoshop, we'll go to File, Scripts, Load Files into Stack. And from this lesson folder, I'm going to grab those two layers and click OK. And what we have is a sky that is completely, even nowhere near Hawaii, on the other side of the globe. But what is important is that the direction of the light, the time of day, and the color all match with our original shot. So as you can see, we have same time of day, late afternoon, golden hour. The sun is somewhere off to the left, and we do have some of that blue coming back in the sky. Now, unlike the pool shot that we just did previously, if I stretch this sky out and just start painting it in, we're going to run into problems immediately, because what we get are all these palm trees poking up, and it's just impossible to paint in that sky perfectly around the edges of these palm trees. So we're going to delete that layer mask. So what we're going to do is we're going to go over to this channels panel here, and we're going to make a mask using our channels. Now, if you haven't used channels in Photoshop before, what a channel is essentially a black and white representation of the intensity of color in a photograph. Where you see more of a color, you will see more white. Where you see less of a color, you'll see more black. So if I look at the red channel here, you see the roof is fairly red, so there's going to be a bit of a brighter tone to the roof. Now, if I go to the blue channel, where there is obviously no blue in that roof at all, it's going to be almost black on the roof. So it's almost like a histogram laid out over your image. It's just displayed in a different way than a traditional histogram. And the beauty of these channels is that, as you know, a mask is made out of black and white, and you can use these channels to make masks corresponding to the amount of white and black in each channel. So for example, if I want to use this blue channel, we're going to have more black in the bottom half, more white in the top half. Obviously, because the sky is blue, there's going to be more white where there's more blue. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to make a mask out of this blue channel. And in order to make a nice clean mask, I'm going to want the foreground to be almost totally black so that we're hiding, and the sky to be almost totally white so that we're revealing our fake sky. So in order to do that, I am going to duplicate this blue channel, and I'm going to apply a curves adjustment to it. Now, if you hit Command M or Control M, you'll get this curves dialog box. And this line here is our tone curve. On the left are the darks, and on the right are the brights. So I'm just going to pull this down and adjust this curve until what you see are almost pure whites on the right-hand side and lots of blacks on the left. And as you can see, the more I play with this curve, the further I separate my blacks and my whites, the cleaner my mask is going to be. So when you have it looking something like this, go ahead and click OK. And then if you want to activate the selection from this to make your mask, you can go ahead and Command or Control click on that channel. You'll see you'll get the little dotted marching ants around your hand there. And you can go back to your RGB layers And I want you to turn on your sky. Now, once your sky is enabled, go ahead and click the Add Layer Mask button. And what you're going to get is mostly a perfect sky. Now, if you look closely, there's of course some trouble in here where the sky wasn't perfectly masked. But what you can do is on this mask, you can take your brush, a big soft black brush, and just gently paint it out and let some of that background in, just going very gently, right? And that's going to seamlessly blend the mask, and that's going to seamlessly blend that sky into your foreground. And again, if I alt-click on that mask, you can see the mask, and you can refine it accordingly. And now if I zoom in, say to 100%, that's an almost perfect mask around those really tough trees. And if you want to blend this even more perfectly, you can adjust the feather of the mask. And if you click on the mask itself and go to the Properties tab here, you can adjust the feather so that you get a more seamless transition from your mask to the objects. And to further sell this, we can adjust the opacity of the layer itself down to say 70 or 80%. And again, if we zoom in, we have a perfect mask around that tree. Everything is blended beautifully. Without having to go crazy with the pen tool or anything else, we have a nice, perfect mask around those really, really delicate trees. All right, so we've added some nice moods, some clouds to this scene. Goes from a blank, empty sky to something a bit more interesting. Now I just kind of want to warm this whole thing up and sell the idea of sunset. So I'm going to add, just like I did in the last image and in the pool, a solid color adjustment layer. Pick a nice warm orange. Put the opacity down around 8% and change the blend mode to your taste. If you want to go with overlay or color, I find those two are really the best for adding some nice color to these images. Alternatively, if you don't want to use the color fill layer, you could go down to your adjustment layers button again, and I'm going to have you click on the color lookup. And a color lookup is a adjustment layer that's really often used in film grading. And what this is it's like a bunch of preloaded lookup tables, which are just basically Photoshop's preloaded color grading tools. And you can apply any of these profiles to the image to get a nice, more or less professional color grade. Now, obviously, I don't want to use the moonlight one. I might want to use the soft warming lookup table. And again, if I turn that on and off, you can see I go from a pretty, honestly, sterile looking shot to something that has a bit more of a color graded mood to it. Now, obviously, with this color lookup table, you can adjust the blending mode of the layer to something like color, which is going to only affect the color rather than the luminosity. And of course, you can also adjust the opacity of that layer to help give a nice warming filter to this. All right, so obviously we have our soft warming filter here. It does add a little bit of red. It's not my absolute favorite. We could choose another one. For example, we could go to the late sunset or edgy amber. Let's try the edgy amber. That's obviously going to be very, very warm. But again, if you adjust the opacity, it's doing essentially the same thing as the color fill layer, but the colors are a bit tweaked differently, and it's just fun to kind of play around with. So if you like that, we can put the opacity, and I'll put it like 10% or so. And again, you can turn that on and off, and you can see everything. Like, look at the blues and some of the coldness of the image. It's taken right away. And that's just another way to color grade these images, to add some mood, some color to them. If you want to go with the lookup table or do it manually, either way. But I think that looks pretty good. So let's go ahead and do some cloning here. We're going to hit S for our clone tool and clone out some of that mess on the roof. And we can clean up some of this dead grass in the foreground. All right, after a quick clone down there, a little duplication, and it looks like we got something up here in the sky that I want to zap, a little bird or something. I know from the last shot our verticals here are pretty good, so I'm going to just go ahead and save this as our final golden hour. All right, so that was 2 quick shots. We had our main twilight shot and a bonus golden hour shot, and a couple new ways to color grade your images to take them from that sort of monotonous blue, which gets a little boring after a while, to add some color lookup tables, and some color grading to give your images a little bit of extra pop and zing for your clients. So let's go back on location and go to our next shot.